Welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Key to Modern Supply Chains, Automated Testing That Delivers. I'm Brian Strait, an editor with Peerless Media, which includes my brand Supply Chain Management Review magazine, as well as Logistics Management magazine, and I'll be your host for today's special event. We're thrilled to have two industry experts with us today, Josh Owen, CEO and co-founder of Cycle Labs, and Jeff Jones, director at enVista, will share their expertise on how test automation can transform warehouse operations. Before we get started with our conversation, though, I'd like to thank our sponsors for today's event, enVista and Cycle Labs, that are enabling us to bring this to you today. I'd also like to mention that all attendees are muted for this presentation. We will have time at the end for a Q&A session, so we welcome you to submit questions at any time during the presentation by using the Q&A button on your console. We have a lot of great content to share with you today, so at this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Josh Owen. Josh, the platform is all yours.
Brian, thank you so much. I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. Really excited to spend some time together, especially with our partner enVista. I'll start by doing a quick introduction for myself and my company, and then I'll send it over to Jeff. But as Brian mentioned, my name is Josh Owen. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Cycle Labs. I've been in the supply chain industry for a little over 20 years, mostly around the deployment of execution systems. I've been focused specifically for the last 10 years, though, on improving the testing and quality of those deployments, leveraging test automation. And that's what we at Cycle Labs do. We build a test automation platform targeted at enterprise software package deployments and improving time to value and quality for those deployments. With me is Jeff Jones from our fantastic partner, enVista. Jeff is the technical director at enVista. And Jeff has also been in the supply chain industry for roughly 2 decades, Jeff. So together, we started to build a little bit of experience, I think, right?
We do.
Absolutely. Okay, well, perfect. Well, it's great to have you, Jeff. I always enjoy spending some time with you. In fact, we got to spend some time together earlier this week at ProMat. But before we get to that, maybe you take an opportunity to explain a little bit about the goals of the Cycle Labs and enVista partnership.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I would love to. So the goal of the Cycle Labs and enVista partnership is to really remove the obstacles and the roadblocks for our customers as they deploy these advanced systems in their supply chains, whether it's a warehouse management, different technologies, WES, WCS. How can we help them test more efficiently, more rapidly, and more reliable so they can adapt customization and innovation enhancements and make that part of their DNA?
Exactly. And I think from a Cycle Labs perspective, prior to launch as a standalone company back in 2021, we always knew that we needed to operate with a partner first mentality. And there's a few reasons for that, but probably the largest reason is that we've had this belief since inception that the highest value for our joint clients, users of the Cycle Labs platform, comes through partnerships with folks like yourselves at enVista, because you guys are experts, right? enVista are experts in supply chain technology, you're experts in the deployment and support of these big, complicated systems. And that's what's important when you think about a comprehensive test automation strategy. Of course, you have to understand the testing platform, but maybe more importantly, you have to understand the system under test, right? So take Kerber Warehouse Advantage as an example, right? You have to understand what is important about that application. Maybe more specifically, how do individual clients use that application? Which parts of the application are important to them? And there's no better team to do that than the trusted system integrators who are operating with these organizations today. And so we appreciate that partnership by enVista.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And what we do at enVista is our goal is to optimize the supply chain from the physical to the digital space. So whether it's network optimization, inventory placement, all the way to warehouse management implementation, we're trying to optimize for our customer. We stepped back and looked at it. What better way to optimize and help optimize than our partnership with Cycle Labs, and how we can now use this partnership to advance their testing of these modern systems.
Absolutely, Jeff. So, all right, I said we were going to talk a little bit about ProMat. We just spent the better part of a week up in Chicago together. There's a lot of folks at this conference. It's a very big show. It's always a fantastic opportunity to get together, to see customers, to see partners, to see prospects, spend some time together, learn about what's hot, what the breaking news is in the supply chain space. I think this year, as could have been expected, there's always a lot of innovation around robotics and physical automation. Lots of big booths there this year from those providers. Was there anything there that stood out to you?
I think just the the new innovation that's coming in these systems. And what I mean is, we have the conventional warehouse management system, but all these other features now they're starting to bolt on that make operations life easier, but ultimately make the ecosystem a little bit more complex. And how do those live together in this single, environment for our customers?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think, from our perspective, talking a little bit about test automation, it's been an interesting journey. I'd say the conversations were pretty exciting this year, which is, I will say, a decently new concept, right? I've been going to ProMat for probably 8 or 10 years, and I've been talking about test automation at that conference that entire time. And I would say even as short as 3 years ago, when I would show up and try to talk to customers or OEMs or partners about test automation, you sort of like see their eyes glaze over and roll back in their head and like, well, why are you talking to me about that? I'm not the technical person. Why are you guys even having this conversation? And I think we've seen that change a lot recently. I don't know. Did you have any conversations
Absolutely.
that you felt like, yeah, okay.
Excitement was an understatement. Anyone I spoke to and the conversation of automated testing came up, their ears perked up. They were ready to talk and learn more about it because they're already starting to see these systems. The WMS systems, the warehouse systems have been slow to adapt or slow to modernize, but they're being forced that way now. Everything's going cloud native, containerization, things like this. And customers are really starting to see that testing can be a roadblock. So they're trying to find ways around it. So automated testing lends itself to really just fit well in that conversation. And the people that I spoke to were highly excited to learn more about it and couldn't wait to advance the conversation.
No, I completely agree. And so I think, being transparent, I think as an industry, and maybe this is true in all industries, but I know supply chain, as an industry, oftentimes we'll get sort of latched onto these buzzword terms, right? These sort of hot topic things that everybody's talking about. But sometimes it can be difficult to actually point to a practical use case or a real world example where this technology is being used to provide true value to clients and customers and partners in this space. And I would say that we've seen test automation as a concept kind of be on this slow boil. It has not become one of these big hot topic buzzwords just yet. And I was saying, frankly, I think that's a good thing, because what we're doing and what we're seeing is we're seeing real world deployments, right, in partnership with our clients, where this is providing real tangible value. And my belief is that probably within the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see test automation become one of these boilerplate hot topic things that companies have realized they must have. And so right now we're in the early parts of that adoption curve, but the conversations at ProMat earlier this week definitely led me to believe as an industry, we've recognized this as a challenge and we're starting to see some real adoption.
I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things when you look at a convention such as ProMat, how many of those things are still conceptual or proof of concept phase, right? Our partnership, we're putting this in practice. We have customers already. This is hitting the road. This train is moving. And I think that's what really is getting people excited, because they can talk to customers, learn about the benefits, and actually see how automated testing can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that actually might be a great segue, Jeff, to one of the first topics that I wanted to dig into, aside from just sort of recapping our time together at ProMat this week. So as you said, you see some cutting edge stuff there, but oftentimes it can be years before you see practical application of some of these technologies in the supply chain space. So if you'll bear with me, I've got two sort of thoughts on this matter. One's a quick personal story, right? So one of the first projects that I was involved in my career in supply chain was actually the original iPhone launch back in 2007. And, that was a big jump from like Blackberries and flip phones and things like that at the time, right? And I remember sitting in the warehouse, the night before these things were released to the public, and we got to play with one a little bit, and it was thrilling and it was exciting. And it frankly changed the world forever, right? I don't think we knew what was about to sort of unravel on the other side of launching that in partnership with Apple. But I rarely step into a warehouse in 2025 and see that type of technology in use on mobile devices. Just majority of the time, you still see sort of like these BT220 terminal emulation handhelds running around. And so that's a long time, right? That's a very long time in the iPhone launch.
The old RF on a stick. We're still using them.
That's right. That's just one acute example of like we've had this technology out there for years and years and years, and for whatever reason, it's been slow to be adopted in the supply chain space. And then secondly, I think some of that slow adoption, I think, rather is not because the space can't use it, not because there isn't a practical use case for it, but because there's a fear of change. So I would sort of posit that over the past, say, 3 decades or so, when these big organizations try to make these upgrades, when they try to introduce change into these complex systems, it's not always painless. In fact, a lot of times it's very painful, and it's big, and it's expensive, and it's harder than the teams would like to have admitted. And oftentimes it results in people losing their jobs, right? And so when the new person comes in, what I've experienced is there's oftentimes pushback. It's like, well, we're actually not going to try and upgrade. We're not going to try and change because the quote unquote, the system, it just works. It still gets the job done. And I think that's sort of a manifestation of the fear of what we've gone through when we actually try and implement change. I don't know if that's something you've experienced.
No, absolutely. I think also, the status quo in practice was risk mitigation, to your point. The warehouse is being a cost center, right? Let's minimize the costs. How much can we actually get on our return on investment? It's not broken. Let's don't fix it. We have our rack system in our server room that is working fine. So the adoption to these modern technologies has been slow, to say the least, right? But now the OEMs are really starting to push the conversation forward and saying, we don't want you to stay on-prem anymore. It's better for us. We provide a better service to you to modernize our platform, to move it onto a cloud type environment, to be cloud native, and all of these modern tools, which have left the customers in somewhat of a challenging predicament. Okay, great. Now I'm modernized. I have to modernize, but maybe I don't have the testing infrastructure in my organization to really support the needs of this modern supply chain.
I think you're exactly right, and I think that's sort of a little bit of a foreshadowing of a topic we're going to get to here in a minute. But I think just to put a bullet point on the end of that thought, I think you're right, and I think what we're saying here is customers who are adopting test automation have now the ability to overcome that fear of change, because what we're seeing is that we can identify the risks prior to production, we can account for those risks prior to production, and we can actually make the changes we want to make when we want to make them. Therefore, we actually can implement process improvement. We can upgrade these systems. We can introduce robotics and test the outcomes of those changes prior to pushing into production, which allow our customers to make these changes they want to make when they want to make them, as opposed to sort of being held captive for fear of change.
Yeah, I think customers can now be in charge of that change and control that change through things such as automated testing.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, so we've said automated testing, test automation a lot so far. So I wrote down a definition. I'm going to read it because I think sometimes it helps to just get on the same page with what is it that we mean when we say this term. And then right after that, Jeff, I'm gonna bring up a video. I think this is built by the enVista team. It's going to show Cycle Labs executing an automated test on a Kerber, maybe we should say Infios these days, system, and we'll let you kind of walk us through what we're seeing. But first, let me read this definition. Okay, so what do we mean when we say test automation? Okay. Test automation is the practice of using software tools to automatically execute predefined test cases on a system, an application, or a process to ensure its functionality continues to run correctly and meets business requirements. So that's sort of the basic definition. A nuance I'd like to point out, though, right? Our joint clients aren't necessarily software companies per se, but rather they are consumers of enterprise software, right? They are buying large packaged software applications, sort of lacing them together, right, to form a system that runs their mission critical business processes. And they're leveraging test automation to ensure that those systems go uninterrupted when change is introduced.
Very
right?
well.
So I think that's a nuance that I think is important to point out. They are building systems. They're just using larger building blocks, right?
Absolutely.
We're not testing code. Yeah, we're testing a system alignment to business processes.
Whether it's OMS, ERP, TMS, and WMS, how do all these bits and pieces fit together that I've received and purchased from these different OEMs, and how can I combine it to match my business needs?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we've given a definition. it can still kind of feel ethereal. Like, what is this? What's it actually doing? What does it look like? So if you bear with me, I'm going to pull this video up real quick, and maybe you can kind of talk us through a little bit of what we are seeing.
Absolutely, I'd love to. So what we're going to see here as the video queues up is we're going to go first and look at, this is the Cycle Labs user interface. Common language, human readable, and it's going to go into Warehouse Advantage and actually go through the GUI to upload and log into as a user in Warehouse Advantage. Now, I want to call out, it's a little bit different than some other testing in that some other testing wants to go directly to the database and test the connection that way. The difference is here is we're actually going through the graphical interface that your end user is experiencing. So we're really giving, I'd say, a more thorough test. Just because you get a better response directly to the database, if you're having lags and you're getting a spinning wheel on your mobile device, you're getting latency on your mobile device, it's not responding in time, then you're going to get some challenges that way, and ultimately the end user experience is going to be less than ideal, right? So by us using the locators, going through, actually logging in through the user interface and testing that way, we feel like we're giving a more complete test result to those companies as to how their system's going to perform.
Absolutely. So hopefully it's helpful to see it run a little bit, because that's the sort of thing that kind of helps us realize what it is we're talking about actually. And as much as I love to see the platform running and exercising an application, I think the important thing to call out is the ideal scenario is you're not actually watching this thing run, right? No. It's actually scheduled to run maybe at night, maybe when you commit a change to a repository, maybe on the weekend, whatever makes sense for you. Do you agree?
Well, now you're starting to really lean into what's the value of automated testing, right? And so to your point, Josh, the value, it's fun to watch, but that's not really what we're trying for here. The goal is that, you know, we've worked all day. Our development team has configured the changes necessary, and they're getting ready to leave for the day. Now, we also know that about 60% of a developer's time is in unit testing the code they just developed. So imagine now a world where your developers are 5 o'clock, they're checking out for the day, and they hit a button. And while they're gone and eating dinner with their families and sleeping, Cycle Labs and enVista, these tests are running in the background automated. So when your developers come in the morning, on their desk is a report of how the system performed. Were there any timeouts with any latency experience? Do we need to optimize anywhere? So all of a sudden now we're making more direct use of our developers' time. We have more consistent inputs to the tests. And we're able to produce and deliver enhancements to the end users faster than ever before.
So those are interesting points, Jeff, and I think it's helpful to kind of paint a picture of what that looks like, sort of what tangible artifacts do you get. Just kind of an off-the-cuff question. Why do you think you see our joint clients being interested in this? Like, is it for regression testing? Is it only about upgrades? When are they wanting to run these tests?
I think it depends on where they are in the life cycle, Josh. I think it's a great question. If they are in an implementation phase, then regression testing or functional testing is providing tremendous value, right? Because we're using it now to complement their manual testing team, because there's continuous changes coming from the development team. So we're able to regression test and push through a little faster. When it comes to, okay, now my system's developed, I'm ready to go, right? The last thing we want to do is performance test. So a lot of the OEMs will say, hey, we want you to get a full day's volume through the system and test. But that's really not possible unless you have, 50 to 100 manual testers that want to sit in a room and hammer away all day. enVista and Cycle Labs actually just had a retail customer on the East Coast that they were concerned about their system performance prior to go live. So using our services with the Cycle tool, we actually put 300% of their anticipated peak volume through their system prior to go live. So we knew exactly where the opportunities existed to improve, to enhance. We also knew that we were confident when the day they went live, they would not experience any latency or performance issues, and they didn't. So we were able to remove that concern off the team's desk.
So I got excited there for a second, Jeff, because you said something that I wanted to come back to. And I think you said the words, it complements the manual testers. So does that mean we still need manual testing in a test automation strategy?
I think we'll always need a manual testing, and it's a relationship, right? We want to 60, 40, 50, 50. We want to automate as much as we can. What I would do is we're looking to automate, I would say, the heavy lifts. So typically an inventory move, a lot of things touch it, a lot of things that maybe you can't emulate with a human tester that we can do with automated testing. So we're really trying to blend it and complement. That way, the manual testers can also spend time really focused on the exceptions, the little nuances, if, then, therefore, or those clauses like that. They can really dig in, and they can also automate before and after their test to expedite their own testing.
I think I couldn't have said it better myself. I think when we think about it from a Cycle Labs perspective, we will often communicate the value of testing to our customers through what we'll call a risk-based analysis. The idea being like, let's identify the smaller subset of very high volume, very important, very risky processes, and let's first start there. Some processes maybe are easy to automate, but they don't provide an immense amount of value. Some processes might be incredibly valuable, but they're very, very difficult to automate. And so it doesn't always mean that we're automating everything, that it's all automated or it's all manual. Usually, like most things in life, there is a spectrum, and then there is a blend of things to create the appropriate approach, right? And so our perspective is that hopefully we're freeing up the time of those manual testers. If we've done this correctly, we're giving them more freedom to focus on edge case testing, to focus on those tests that are important but maybe aren't easy to automate. Right. Things like that, right? It's a dual strategy.
But you said also that better use of the manual tester's time, right? So now when we look at automated testing, and so we do the risk-based analysis, we know what we're going to automate, we know what we're still going to manually test. How does this impact the overall project timeline? And that's a real value as well. We're actually able to pull in and decrease the timeline by about 30% of the projected schedule. Now, you've been in projects, Josh, and I've been in projects, and we know that if there's one component that rarely hits budget, it's testing. It usually goes over. The time for break fix can often lag and become a roadblock down the road to the implementation, things like that. So by us able to use automated testing in conjunction with the manual and compress that testing timeline, but give higher quality testing, consistent testing through automation, we're ultimately delivering a better product in a shorter amount of time, so we can hit these critical timelines that projects often have.
I think you got it just right, Jeff. And so that leads me to a question I had later in the list here, but because we're on the topic, I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. All the time, in this sort of conversation around automated versus manual testing, prospects, net new customers, folks that we're talking to for the first time about the concept of test automation will often ask us, "Oh, great. Does that mean I don't need UAT anymore?" What are your thoughts on that?
I think you always need UAT. With everything, there's all kinds of factors, right? We're testing things from, is your data flowing from your ERP into WMS? If we get data elements that aren't configured the right way, we'll notify that error message and be able to pick that up sooner. But in the end, the automated testing, we can also have, spin up 50 RF guns simulated and have 50 people doing 50 different processes throughout the warehouse. I think one of the things that I often get asked is well, is automated testing going to test my network and my RF guns? And I still think that when you look at the UAT and the dress rehearsals and things like that, there's still an important factor for that, right? There's a need for that, a requirement for it, because there are certain things that automated testing just isn't designed to test, right? But also when you step back, the user acceptance is more so, automated testing is making sure that the process is flowing. I think user acceptance testing is making sure that the process makes sense to the end user. Is it flowing how I want? Do the screens read the right way? Do I need to move my buttons around because it's just not conducive to an efficient process? So we still need to have that user acceptance testing. The automated testing is really just testing the technology behind it.
I think you nailed it. And I think, let's say there's sometimes healthy, sometimes an unhealthy tension between, say, the ops teams and the IT teams when we go through these processes of change and we're trying to implement a net new technology for the folks out on the floor, right? And all too often, the first time they're experiencing the system that is the ops folks out on the floor is in UAT, right? One of the most important parts of a successful deployment is cooperation and trust between these two teams. And I think what I've seen is if the first time a user is putting their hands on the system, they're finding all kinds of technical bugs, that's not going to be super helpful for building confidence on the ops side of the house with regards to the project we're trying to implement here.
I think you nailed it, Josh. One of the biggest risks is change management, right? You can have the best system out there, but if you don't effectively manage change to your end users, then you're likely going to decrease the success of your go live. So by giving our end users, I'll say, a more bug-free solution that they can test, they can acceptance test for the functional application, they can all their dress rehearsals, they're having a much cleaner experience, right? All of a sudden now we're starting to reduce the risk of that change management. The adoption rate goes up, comes on sooner, right? People are getting excited about it. All of a sudden, those that are involved in the UAT, you have this grassroots kind of movement starting. They go out to the floor, they start talking to people, they're excited. Hey, the system wasn't buggy, it was working great. And now you have this change management is on the side of the organization that's implementing this, right? And that's a huge win for any company.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think we got a slide here that'll show a little bit of some of the details, some hard numbers around just this idea. So I'm going to jump to it. Here's a quick success story from one of our customers, right? Yes. And what it's showing here is what I think are some pretty incredible results, right? It's a highly customized environment. We generated over 28,000 automated transactions in this environment prior to UAT. And I think an interesting point to add here is when we first engaged with this client, I think they had over 900 manual test cases that they wanted us to implement. But the highlight here is that with simply 27 end-to-end automated processes, we were able to cover, say, 80% of those target test cases in an automated fashion. So back to the conversation earlier, there's still some manual testing involved there, but it's a combination of manual and automated testing. Not an incredible mountain of automated tests, right? 27 end-to-end tests. But through that deployment and through this testing exercise, we were able to identify 40 failures or defects, not necessarily software bugs, but configuration, could have been missed requirements, whatever the case was. We identified all of these things prior to UAT. We still ran UAT. In fact, we ran it more efficiently, more effectively, and with a higher level of trust than we have in the past, but we didn't try to replace it.
Exactly. And I think, when we look at those 40 failures or defects caught, who knows how many of those could have led ultimately to an outage, right? And we know that an outage has bottom line impact costs when that happens. So we're able to prevent these type of situations that, quite frankly, cost companies a lot of money when they could have been preventable in the first place.
Absolutely. Okay, so I've got a couple of sort of like lightning round questions here at the end that I want to talk through with you, right? Okay, so I think I'll posit a thesis, and then I'm interested in your take on this, right? I think historically, right, in the supply chain industry, testing has been pretty undervalued, right? It's kind of viewed as a necessary evil, but I think what we're saying is, if done appropriately, if supplemented with automated testing, it doesn't have to be viewed that way. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that testing can be viewed as maybe a something that stagnates innovation, right? It's a roadblock. And all of a sudden now we're not able to deliver enhancements fast enough to our operations, which may have been defined ultimately by a customer, right? So our ability to automate testing with Cycle Labs and enVista, now we're folding testing into our innovation strategy, right? So we're able to be more deliberate, move to the offensive, right? Be proactive about our enhancements now, maybe offer more services to the customer than just what the initial ones were. And that's all supported and empowered by automated testing.
I completely agree. I think, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but we're seeing a lot of change in the space. And I'm going to call us back to the beginning of the conversation. We were talking about what we were experiencing at ProMat. right? Where you're seeing innovation, right? You got automation, and a lot of the automation, physical automation. You got a lot of those physical automation, but there's also deploying that physical automation with a warehouse execution system or
Right.
some type of a WCS type system, right?
Absolutely.
I was just recently on site with a client who has manufacturing out on their floor. So they've actually got a couple different warehouse execution systems coupled with a TMS, coupled with a WMS. So what you're seeing, I think, at least what I'm experiencing is these sort of like fragmentation of systems within the four walls of this distribution center. You don't just have a WMS now. You've maybe got a couple of different WESs, a WCS, you've got a WMS. That becomes complicated to test. Do you think that test automation has a role in simplifying that?
Well, it does. But I think as you look at historically, it's been the WMS kind of took care of everything, and now we're getting much more purpose built in our solutions. So I do think that automation plays a role and simplifies this testing of ecosystems, if you will. One of the bigger challenges is just the flow of data back and forth, making sure that it's put in the right phrasing for each system to consume and respond back. And those are things that maybe before used to cause testers quite the frustration in troubleshooting this. But with the output of literally line by line, this is what the system's doing, this is what it's calling, here's our response time, we're actually able to use the outputs of Cycle Labs and the automated tests to more quickly troubleshoot those issues. So I think as we look as these ecosystems expand, but yet become more fragmented with purpose-built solutions, the ability to test cross-functionally across all of those solutions is Cycle Labs definitely makes that much easier.
No, I appreciate you saying that, and I agree. And I think so. What we're saying, I think the title or like the theme of the conversation today was why we believe jointly between enVista and Cycle Labs that test automation plays a critical role in modern supply chains. And I think what you and I are talking about now is kind of that shift to what a modern supply chain is.
That modernization.
Right? I think. Yeah, exactly. So you've got multiple systems in there now. You've got lots of vendors that are competing. It's much more competitive than it used to be. You got physical automation. You've got robotics. You've got all these things. They're very cool things, but it can complicate these systems, which of course complicates the testing. And I would say, in order to even get to using those systems, we've got to get confidence in the testing process, just so we can even get to the point of actually successfully deploying all of these changes.
Right. And I would say also that look, you know, when you start putting these these individual solutions together, you have more integrations than ever before to test, and that's where automated testing proves its value yet again.
Okay, so one more question here, I think, and then we're going to wrap up probably the main part of conversation. So this is a hot topic, right? So who is actually responsible for testing the deployment of these systems? So you've got the OEMs, you got the companies that are building these big flagship systems, you've got systems integrators that are all too often involved in actually deploying these systems, running these projects. You've got the end customers who are purchasing these systems to run their business. So you got lots of players involved. Whose responsibility is testing?
Well, it feels like a trick question, but ultimately the answer is everyone. We're all responsible. The OEM is going to test their base system up to the point of delivery. Then we have the configuration effort. It's going to be tested there. But the real testing on the customer, that responsibility exists when it's inserted into that complex ecosystem we just spoke about. So there are different phases and different responsibilities all along the life cycle of the solution. But ultimately, we are all, the OEM, the integrator, and the customer, are responsible for testing.
As I said, couldn't say it better myself. I think oftentimes whenever I get the luxury of presenting or talking about this topic, I'll say, if you're a user of one of these systems, raise your hand. If you work at one of the companies that build these systems, raise your hand. If you are a systems integrator, raise your hand. If your hand is up, testing is your responsibility, right? It's a team sport. Absolutely. We all have a role to play.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So I think that wraps up the majority of the conversation. And I hope we had some audience engagement. So I'll kick it back over to Brian. I think, Brian, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, thank you, Josh. It was a good conversation there, and a lot of good information, and it has generated a bunch of questions. So we're going to get to those, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Before we get to that, though, I do want to mention, if you have a question, it's not too late to submit it. So you may do so at this time by using the Q&A button on your console. Also want to mention there is a white paper and a blog post that's available for you through our references section on the console, so you can access those if you wish to download those at this time. Now, if you guys are ready, let's get to a few of those questions.
Let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, the first one isn't Kerber Infios, as you say, as you know, as many know, they changed names this month. Is that customized for each deployment? Does that make it less conducive to automated testing?
I think it makes
so
it
Jeff,
go ahead.
I was going to say,
I love it.
Yeah, I think you should answer it. You should answer this one.
So the Envios Warehouse Advantage kind of markets itself as being highly adaptable. And one would think that wow, that maybe that presents challenges for automated testing. But what we've done at enVista is we've actually built out the base library of functionality. So we've built 85% there. And then we go in and work with our customers to do a scoping effort, and we just take a small little bit and then configure to their specific Warehouse Advantage configuration. So I would actually say it's more conducive to automated testing because of those complexities, because of the configuration, the adaptability pieces that are needed there to make sure we get a more thorough test.
I think you're exactly right, Jeff. I think, first off, whether it's Kerber, Blue Yonder, SAP, Manhattan, whomever the vendor is, I've never once met with a prospect who didn't ask this question. Yeah, but we're custom, right? We're very special. It's going to be hard to do this for us. And the answer is, well, that's all the more reason you should do it, right? And there's definitely strategies that bring down the level of effort to build out the test, to bring down the maintenance of investing in a test automation strategy. But I guess I would ask the question sort of rhetorically, what's the alternative? If the thought process is we're too complicated to do it in an automated fashion, and the answer today is we aren't staffed or resourced appropriately to do it manually, that's a scary outcome, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. And everybody is unique, but everybody has some commonalities too, and it's great that solutions can bridge those gaps, right, and bridge those differences that everybody has. Our next question is about performance testing. Can Cycle do that, and have you done it?
So I'll take this one as well, Josh, if that's okay.
Yeah, do it.
So actually, yes, enVista with Cycle has done this, and we use what's called the enVista appliance with some Microsoft technology, and we can actually go through and it will spin up a wide number of RF users, mobile device users, to really get that true simulated load on the system. There's one thing about singularly or even 5 at a time just putting volume through a system. There's another completely different element to spinning up 50 virtual RF guns, having 10 people pick, 10 people replenishment, and 30 people pack, or whatever variety that may be. So we have done it. We have a lot of continued interest in our customer base that want more of this. Because as you know, in distribution, we have a lot of cyclical volume. We have our Q4 peak that everyone prepares all year for, and volumes can't get close to that throughout the year. So how can we simulate that? How can we make sure that our system is configured and robust enough to support that kind of volume? And we do that through our performance testing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer, of course, is yes. Yeah, we do this all the time. And it's one of the biggest use cases that we have with regards to net new customers having interest in the platform, because it's a pretty painful and difficult item to check off the list if you don't have a good technological solution to help you get that done. I would say what I've experienced in my time in this space is all too often the idea of performance testing is a reactive approach to an issue. So rarely do we make the investment to do this up front, and we really do it when we're like, okay, now there's a problem. We have to uncover why this is happening, and then you throw the SWAT team at it to try and nail down what the issue is. And I think with a platform like Cycle Labs and partners who know the system like enVista, what we would encourage clients to do is to proactively performance test. Right, to Jeff's point, certainly to get ready for like the retail season, for the high volume situations and things like that. But also all the time, right? These are complicated databases on the back end. You've got statistics changing all the time. You've got net new SQL queries that are out there running all the time. We need to be constantly doing this in a proactive way to identify issues before they are a problem in production, not just reactively to identify what a root cause is.
Yeah, it's a little too late when the problem happens, right? And now
That's
you're
right.
now you're scrambling and you're in firefighting mode, just trying to solve the problem and not not helping your business go forward. Let's move to our next question. Is this a WMS specific challenge, or does the same logic apply to other enterprise applications?
So I'll go first on this one, Jeff, because I got a lot of thought, sort of passion around this, I guess. The answer, of course, is absolutely not a WMS problem, right? I think theoretically, you could even step outside the bounds of supply chain. So Brian, if you were to go to the airport and they're like, hey, congratulations, Mr. Straight, you've been upgraded to first class, but sorry, give me a minute. It's a new system. I can't quite
never
get
happens,
the tickets
by
to
the
print.
way.
Right, yeah, exactly, right. There's too many people in line in front of you, I'm sure. But if you're lucky enough to get that call, maybe you get the answer, hey, we're having just a couple issues getting the tickets printed. It's a new system. Please give us a few minutes, right? It's the same problem, right? This is an enterprise production system. Some change, some configuration, some network, whatever it is, has caused there to be an issue. And now maybe we can be patient and stand there and wait an extra few minutes to get the ticket printed. But when it's an extra few minutes to get the conveyor back up and running again, or when the 18-wheelers are running down, backing up the interstate because we can't get stuff loaded into the trailers, there's a physicality to the supply chain execution space that makes this a really acute and painful problem. So it's not a WMS problem. It's not a TMS problem. It's an enterprise software deployment problem. But we're focused on solving this in the supply chain space because there is an acute physicality to it that makes this painful. And the platform itself is independent of any particular technology because it has to be. Even if you're just testing a WMS as an example, you're going to have to exercise up and downstream systems, parcel integrations, material handling equipment integrations, and things like that. And so the approach has to be both technologically, system, and even vendor agnostic.
Yeah, I would agree, Josh. Even thinking as simple as looking at a parcel management system, right? What is the spool time for me to get a label? Where do I need to put my scanner on the inline conveyor? These are types of challenges that we're able to figure out with automated testing. So I would say it expands well beyond a WMS and really is the enterprise technology that is open to automated testing.
Yep. Our next question, I think, touched a little bit on something you just mentioned a few minutes ago. Being proactive. The question is, what specific defensive strategies can test automation support to protect against supply chain disruptions or system failures? Obviously, things that happen in the future.
Right. I think what testing automation is great at is testing the known processes. I think where we get a little struggle is with the unknown. We can't really test the unknown because we're writing predefined test scripts and things like that. So when we look at it from a defensive nature, it's the load testing, it's the stress testing, hanging responses, preparedness for inbound peaks, inbound volume peaks, outbound volume peaks, seasonality changes such as that. Really understanding what are my upper limits before I start to see degradation in the performance of the solution.
Yeah, listen, I think that's right, Jeff. And I think you can only test, what is a known thing today. It's really hard to test the unknown things, like those unknown unknowns, right? But I think that testing can give us a freedom, right? I think for a long time in this space, we've kind of viewed getting the change into production, if that's a go live or an upgrade or onboarding a new client or whatever the case may be, as the finish line. But the reality is that's the starting line, right? Getting a change into production is just the beginning of having to support that change. It's there for you every day. And probably the world didn't stop while you were working on getting that change into production. So on the second day, there's another change you got to get into production. And you want to make sure that you don't break the thing you did the day before. And so, I would say you're always using and leveraging the investment you made in test automation to move you forward faster in the future because you don't know what things are going to come. Maybe it is onboarding a new vendor or introducing a process improvement, or maybe it's having to source from a domestic manufacturer versus somebody international because there's been some kind of change economically, macroeconomically that's forced you to do so, whatever the case may be. If you've got a solid test automation strategy, then you're constantly in a position to handle those changes when they occur, even if you don't know what change is coming down the pike. None of us can forecast that, but we can constantly be in a position to be ready for it, and test automation certainly helps that.
Yep. Our next question as we move along, everybody deals with this, right? They have a lot of systems. So the question is, how can you test communications across multiple platforms such as a PLC, WCS, WES, AMR, ASRS, et cetera, et cetera?
I can take a first stab at that one, Jeff.
Hey,
So I think this is exactly what we were talking about earlier, right? When you implement sort of like some of these technologies, material handling equipment, robotics, physical automation, so a lot of them come with their own systems. Maybe it's a PLC, right, in the older days. Maybe it's a WES in the newer days. And I think the answer is sometimes it depends, right? Some of these providers will, also provide a way to simulate their system. And the answer is it really depends on what the purpose of the test is. Do I really want to test the WES, or do I want to test the communication points between my WMS and the WES that I'm interfacing with? So depending on the goal would certainly influence the approach to building out that test. And like a platform like Cycle can help us accomplish either one of those goals, right? So we can either A, mock up the response of the WES for the purposes of validating processes inside the WMS, or if the WES doesn't have a great way to simulate tests internally itself, we can both test, internal processes within the WMS, the integration points between those two systems, and internal processes on the WES side, assuming it's a technology that we can exercise readily with the platform, which I'm willing to bet we probably could.
Yeah, I think, Josh, so, this is where working with a good solution provider or partner, right, to really hone and understand what your testing strategy should be, how you should be testing your communication with all of these different solutions. That's really the key to success right here. And then how do you couple that relationship and that strategy with automated testing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. Next question as we move along, is open source unit and integration testing sufficient to verify supply chain applications, or is E2E testing required?
Yeah, so I'll take it first. Oh, yeah. Okay. You go, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I think anytime end-to-end testing is absolutely required. Again, when we went through the last question and the list of disparate systems in there, the data flow, the response times, the user interface, getting that day in the life of the box goes in from the back door and goes out the front door, and all the sub processes in between. That's critical on the checklist to success.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think, sometimes we get wrapped around the axle around these terms. Open source doesn't necessarily speak to the capabilities of any particular platform, but rather how you acquire that technology. So trying to step back from that, I'd say, like any good testing strategy, it's going to span multiple types and different levels of testing, right? In particular, our focus is oftentimes at the end-to-end level because we hopefully rely on our OEM partners, the companies that are building this technology, to do a lot of the unit testing. That is the validation of the code itself. Is it doing what it's supposed to do? But what we can't ask of them is, does that technology, does that system continue to do what it's supposed to do when it's deployed in my ecosystem, right? With my integrations, with my extensions, with my configuration, with my changes, with my data. That makes, a lot of that testing somewhat invalid because we've changed a lot of aspects of how that system runs. And so that's where end-to-end testing comes into play. You want to do the code testing, you want to do the unit testing, you want to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. But then we also have to test that the system continues to function behaviorally the way we want to in our ecosystem.
Right. Yep. Good. We have time. I'm going to squeeze in one more question here before I ask that question. I just want to remind everybody, if you submitted a question and we didn't get a chance to answer it today, don't stress about it. We're going to make sure you get an answer to that. So we'll forward those questions to our guests and they'll respond to you in the days ahead. If you still have a question, even though we're not going to have a chance to get to it today, feel free to submit that as well. And we'll make sure that we forward that along as well. For our final question, and this is my favorite of the questions that we're getting to today, what is the day in the life of an enVista customer who's using testing as a service?
Hopefully boring, to be honest. So our goal is to schedule. So I'll back up, and what we want to do is understand the testing needs of the customer first, right? Mm-hmm. What causes angst? What are your biggest concerns? What do you see as the biggest areas of opportunity? And really look at that system big picture. From there, we're going to do a scoping session. Okay, let's make sure that as we look at this and start building our test scenarios, we're following the right processes, but also following the process as you want them tested. From there, we'll work on a frequency. Maybe you want to run them every other Thursday because that marries up with your release cycle. But ultimately, is we'll schedule some testing, and then our goal is to execute that testing overnight. Again, so it's there for the customer on their desk first thing in the morning. We can get on a huddle, talk about the results. What did we see from it? What do they see in it? Maybe some places to go look, or help them go enhance the opportunities that were addressed from testing. And yeah, make I say harden the system, right, to get ready for that implementation or that go live.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Jeff. I got very little to add there, except for you're right. I mean, I think as much as I love to watch the technology do its thing, the highest value is when you're doing something else while it's taking care of the testing for you.
Absolutely.
Great, guys. Thank you. We're just about out of time, but before we go, I do want to give each of you a chance for a closing remark or two, if you want to do that. So I don't know, Jeff, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, thanks. And as Josh, we've talked about it, these solutions in the supply chain, they aren't getting any simpler. They're more complex, more complicated than ever. And I think that really forces a discussion of how are we doing testing, how are we supporting testing, and how are we bringing automated testing into part of our DNA, part of our organizational structure, so we can really embrace innovation and start delivering at the speed that these solutions are around us. And ultimately what our end customers are demanding, this constant evolution of maybe service levels or products or things like that. And as I look at it, and again, we've been in this space both for quite so many years now, I can only see a future that has automated testing to complement that, to actually be able to move the ball down the field.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, if there's anything we've learned in the recent years, it's that the strategy of avoiding change until you have no other option is no longer a winning strategy. In fact, it's not a luxury that we can afford in 2025, right? So the companies that are going to win in 2025 and going forward are the ones who have figured out a way to make the changes they want to make, to implement process improvement, to adapt, to stay up to date on the latest and greatest versions of the technology that run their business. So simply saying we don't want to change because what we use today still gets the job done is not the way to win in 2025. And so with Cycle Labs as a technology partner, with enVista as an implementation partner, I think companies have a great opportunity to take advantage of technologies like test automation and fantastic system integrator expertise to move the ball forward, to make the changes they want to make when they want to make them, and to win in 2025 and forward.
Absolutely.
Yep. Great, guys. Thank you. We are out of time. I do want to thank both of our guests today, Josh Owen and Jeff Jones, for sharing their expertise with us. Also want to thank our sponsors, enVista and Cycle Labs, for helping bring this content to you today. Finally, we want to extend our deepest gratitude to each of you who took time out of your busy schedules today to listen to us. We greatly appreciate it. For Peerless Media, I'm Brian Straight. Thank you for watching.